Okay, I'll call this July 15th meeting, the Planning and Zoning Commission, to order. First item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Very difficult to do that over Zoom.
I wasn't ready for the flag.
You didn't have the flag up. Ms. Slow, you call the roll.
They'll never.
Chairman Sema,
Here.
Mayor Dalton,
I'm here.
Alderman Fauci,
I'm here.
Mr. Bolazina. He is here. Mr. Kuchin,
Here.
Mr. McKnight.
Here.
Miss Miller,
I'm here.
Miss Monzel,
Here.
Dr. O'Mell. He is here on mute.
Might be.
And Mr. White. Here on mute as well.
Also muted. Okay.
We have nobody absent and we have a quorum via video conference.
All right. I have to say, Zoom is doing great things for our attendance.
Absolutely.
Next up is our approval of our minutes from our June 17th, 2020 meeting. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. White, thank you. Any comments, changes to the minutes?
Nope.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion appears to carry unanimously. Next on our agenda, new business. We have two items on our agenda this evening that pertain to the Covenant Presbyterian Church located at 2143 North Ballas Road. If there's no objection, we will ask the applicant to present all information pertaining to items both 1 and 2 together, but we'll vote on them separately as they appear on the agenda. Item number 1 is a boundary adjustment plat. An application has been submitted by Covenant Presbyterian Church St. Louis owner for approval of a boundary adjustment plat to consolidate 5 parcels into 1 parcel in association with a building addition for Covenant Christian School located at 2143 North Ballas Road in the Suburban Estate Zoning District. And item number 2 is an amended final site development plan. An application has been submitted by Covenant Presbyterian Church of St. Louis, owner, for approval of an amended final site development plan to construct a 1-story addition to serve the Covenant Christian School located at 2143 North Ballas Road in the Suburban Estate Zoning District. First matter before us this evening is for the commission to decide if the proposed amendment is significant and if a public hearing is required. Do I have a motion?
Motion that it is significant.
Thank you, Mr. Bolazina. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. McKnight. Any comments or discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion appears to carry unanimously. Suppose, Laura, I should have asked you to call the roll on that. Do I need to do that, or are we okay with voice vote for significant?
A voice vote is fine.
Okay, thank you. I will now open a public hearing. Mr. Spencer, are there any exhibits?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, staff would like to enter the following exhibits into the record. 1, the municipal code. 2, the comprehensive plan. 3, the development office file is amended from time to time, including staff report titled Agenda Item 1 or Agenda Item 2, Covenant Presbyterian Church amended final site development plan. 4, the amended final site development plan titled Site Development Plan Building Addition for Covenant Presbyterian Church, signed July 6, 2020, prepared by CEDC. 5, the mailing list, notice of public hearing. And 6, notice of public hearing posted on the property and published in the St. Louis County.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer. I'll call for our presenter. Please give your name and address for the record.
This is Michael Keller, Christner Architects, 7604 Carswold Drive. I'm joined by our design team and the owner here this evening. We have Mike Vorwick with CEDC, Steve Myers with Christner, and John Roberts with the Covenant Presbyterian Church. And if I could, I'd like to start by just giving a brief summary or introduction into the project and a little bit of the background. So as you probably realize, the addition is approximately 14,500 square feet, single story wood frame building, largely masonry with some fiber cement accent siding. The program for the project is to be a shared occupancy with the church and school. And to date, the design team and the owner have worked closely with the city planner, the fire marshal, and the neighbors to address concerns related to site access, sprinkler status, traffic flow, and the like. And I would say that it is worth noting that the project is not an increase on demand. The current school is located in the basement, and the addition will be relocating that school, and it is not in terms of occupancy or traffic flow and expansion in that regard. Also, I think we're saying that Covenant's been very thoughtful about this site development and really thinking about their long-term investment in this site and in the community. And I think that is apparent with their partnership with the city and the community. So that's a little bit about the project. I did want to pull up the plan. Am I able to share my screen?
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay.
We don't have video for you, by the way, Mr. Keller, so I don't know if you're not streaming or if we're having a technical problem. We can,
Now, unfortunately, the laptop I'm on does not have a camera. I apologize.
that's fine. We can hear you just fine.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to pull up the rendered site plan. Let me know if you can see it.
You can.
Again?
Okay. So you're aware, Covenant is off of Ballast Road. There's a residential road here, Hawthorne Estates Drive, and the addition is off to the south. And there'll be some adjustment to the drop-off and parking. And what's not shown on here, but will be identified in the civil drawing is a new curb cut exit off to the north here. I would like to ask Mike Vorwick if he could speak to the site development plan. Mike, are you available? You might be on mute.
Oh, hold on one second. I show that he's with us
That's good.
and he's not muted.
I'm seeing that he's connecting to audio.
I think that's Steve Myers.
Oh, okay. Okay, in lieu of Mike commenting here, I'm going to just start to explain some of the issues that we had to deal with in the site. So obviously there is the first item on the agenda is the plot consolidation, and it is bringing together several residential properties into this one here at the south into one large campus for Covenant. With respect to the site development, so the addition is this large gray area here. As I said, we have talked with Fire Marshal several times about the site access and providing adequate access around the building in the event of an emergency. And so this drive will be adjusted slightly to get them further south, as well as providing an additional fire hydrant off to the west and right off of this south green paver space. So there's slight modification there, and there will be a slight modification to the entry drive here. The through conversations with the neighbors, there have been some interest in providing additional exit to limit traffic on Hawthorne further west and to kind of mitigate the effect of car headlights pointing into residential areas. So this represents an idea that was presented to the church and has been added to the site plan that was not initially submitted, but was amended and submitted after the original date. Additionally, the existing dumpster was located right here. So we're looking to put this off to the west with a new masonry enclosure. There will be an additional bioretention area in the north, and that is per the town and country requirements, and will of course meet any MSD requirement after we go to submit and review with them. Steve or Mike, do you have anything to add? I think that's generally the extent of the scope of this project.
It's Steve Myers here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes. Mr. Myers, would you
Okay,
please
yeah.
state your address for the record?
Yes. Steve Myers. I'm at 815 Atalanta Avenue,
Thank you.
Buster Groves. Bet. Yeah, I wanted to note, I did have to log out and log back in, so I apologize for repeating anything that Michael Keller just stated, but did want to make note of that existing Eastern Drive really being used for fire department access.
Yeah, I mentioned that it is a little bit modified in that it extends further south per the fire marshal's request, and there'll be a hydrant added there.
That's all I have to add. Thanks.
Hi, this is Mike Warwick. I apologize. Am I on now?
Yes.
You are, yes. Mr.
Yes, we
Warwick,
can
would you
hear you.
please state your address for the record?
Sure. It's 1673 Blakefield Terrace.
City and zip.
Manchester, Missouri, 63021.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I don't have anything to add to what Mike said. I was able to hear him, but unfortunately I just got unmuted. Everything he said, I guess the biggest change from what was originally submitted was the addition of the exit only lane in the middle of the site, and that was to that was as coordinated by John Roberts with the Covenant Church and the trustees of Hawthorne Estates. It was to meet their request. Otherwise, as Michael pointed out, we have the bioretention basin that will satisfy the city's stormwater requirement of 150% of the volume, as well as provide water quality for MSD.
Do we have any questions from the commission?
Yes.
Mr. Bolzino.
Has staff performed a calculation of what the parking should be? Because if all of these people are now in the basement attending school, and this significant addition is handling all of the new students, hopefully when we can all get together and be in school, then it seems to me we have freed up a significant amount of space that can be used for other programs and presumably require other parking. So I'm interested if staff has performed a area study or any other kind of calculation to determine what the appropriate level of parking should be for this size of a project.
Mr. Bolzino's staff did not do that form of analysis. The minimum required parking is 152 spaces. That's based on the capacity of the church itself. That's the largest user on the site, so that's the parking that's required. Right now they have 170 plus or minus spaces. But I didn't do any other additional analysis of the type that you're describing.
Well, I don't know about this church, but I know that other churches have so-called Sunday school at the same time as church. And presumably that doesn't add any cars, because if you're going to church, you're dropping your kid off at Sunday school, I imagine. But I just don't know if there's other programs that can happen concurrently with the highest usage, which apparently is attending church. So could the applicant
Maybe
speak to that?
Mr. Roberts, I see you're raising your hand.
My name is John Roberts, and I'm at 908 Denard in Manchester. And I'm one of the pastors at Covenant Church. I've been on staff now for 20 years. And the school is in its 17th year, and I also serve as the head of school. A couple things I'd say. First, we're not growing the school. We are one class per grade, and we will continue to be one class per grade. We're purposefully small, so that's a decision that has been consciously made to stay small. If you know Westminster Christian Academy or Kirk of the Hills, those would be considered two of our sister schools, and I know they're both located in Town and Country. The other thing I would say is that our Sunday school takes place between services. So we have two services on a Sunday morning, with adult and children's Sunday school taking place between those services. So because we're not adjusting the size of the school or adjusting our Sunday services or the size of our sanctuary, we're not anticipating that either our Sunday service, our Sunday attendance or the school will grow as a result of this change. It's simply moving our students out of the lower level of the church.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Further questions from the commission?
Yes.
Mr. Bolazina, and then you, Mr. White, after Mr. Bolazina's next question.
Thank you.
And this is just kind of a curiosity, and I don't know how staff handles this in the final approval of a plat, but at least in the drawings that we've been given, there's some easements that appear to continue to go through the building and will be going through the building addition. So how are these, do we require that these easements be vacated before we would approve such a revised plat, or make it a condition that these easements be vacated, because it's not good planning practice to have easements going through people's buildings?
Mr. Bolzini, you're correct. It's not a requirement. It wasn't a requirement when this was replatted back in 1995, when the church did a major expansion. I asked that question, I posed that question to the applicants, and they can certainly investigate and vacate those easements. As you pointed out, they are running under the existing church now. And you certainly can make that a condition of approval.
Well, I will want to make that as a condition because I think it's not a good planning practice to allow a plan through this Planning and Zoning Commission that is obviously on top of an easement. And if it's a record, somebody has rights to that easement and could be very disturbing to the improvements that are placed on top of it. So I don't think it's good planning practice to allow that to happen. So I will make that as a condition. Can we also discuss what kind of landscaping there will be at this detention basin, which unfortunately is at a very prominent corner of this development along a major thoroughfare and an entrance to a subdivision that we'd like to get along with?
This is Mike Keller. Could I speak to the first comment about the easement first?
Sure.
So we have been in discussion with Ameren. That's an Ameren easement. And we do have a plan to reroute the power. Currently it's overhead running in that easement. And Covenant is working with them to relocate that underground, and they will vacate that easement.
Okay, so you wouldn't be opposed to a condition that is something you're going to do anyway?
Yeah.
Okay.
If I could, this is Mike Wahlberg. Just as long as the condition is not something that is a time drain, sometimes getting these easements vacated, we will need permission from all utility companies. So as Michael Keller indicated, it is our plan to vacate the easement. However, vacating the easements can take time, getting permission from all the utility companies.
Well, certainly you should obtain it before you start construction.
Well, the only easement that has a utility in it presently is the one that we've already started coordinating with Ameren. The other easements, as Ryan had indicated, some of them, those were platted with the original lots and they already have buildings situated over them. So those easements were side yard easements when the lots were platted for residential use.
Well, I can't tell from the plat what the ownership and use of the easements are. If they're only side yards, which it doesn't appear to me. I mean, they appear to be the standard utility easements that are required by the utility companies when subdivisions are platted, which means some utility company has some kind of rights to use those easements. I don't know that because the information is not on this drawing. But to the extent that people have rights and you're building on top of those rights, I still will want a condition that you vacate those before you construct improvements over those easement rights.
As I said, we have begun the preparation of the easement vacation documents. It's just not knowing the time frame with which the utility companies will react. I suspect that we can have it done prior to any of the construction. It's just that I know from experience, some utility companies can take their time with the process.
Well, I am just expressing my opinion, and certainly up to a vote of this body. That's my opinion that I would at least ask for a condition on this approval that this homework be done before you start construction.
Mr. White.
Was there any response to the question about the landscaping of the detention basin, if the applicant has some answers about that?
So this is Mike Keller again. The current plan for the bioretention would be seeding, and it would be a lawn. It would be a depression in the ground with grass.
So the banking and the sloping would not be something that would require any fencing or any other kind of barriers. when this area is actually retaining the water?
The bioretention basin will only pond 18 inches of water. And then the floor of the basin will consist of a bioretention soil mix, which has a high percentage of sand that will allow the water to infiltrate into the ground and then be collected through an under drain. So at the worst case, it'll be 18 inches of water.
And then does this discharge into a ditch that goes along the main road, or is that like?
Correct.
Okay. So is there any plans that you know of that MSD has to convert that ditch into any kind of permanent pipe drainage?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm sure once we submit plans to them for review of the construction documents, they would share that, but I am not aware of any.
Okay. So when the water leaves your detention, I assume all your sheet drainage right now just flows essentially to the ditch along the main road. Is that correct?
Correct.
So you're not going to be doing anything different except perhaps directing it out of a pipe now that discharges directly into the ditch on the overflow. So which way does the water go after it enters the ditch? Does it go north or south?
It goes north underneath Hawthorne to the larger drainage channel.
Okay, and what kind and size of pipe is under Hawthorne?
It's an 18-inch reinforced concrete pipe.
Okay, all right. All right, so this is all something presumably MSD would be looking at and
Yes, sir.
be part of your approval. Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. White.
As a continuation on that, does the bioretention basin have riprap on the sides, or is it going to be grass slope?
The sides will be lawn.
Oh, okay, that answers one question. With regard to parking, there's a new parking to the east of the new addition. I assume that will be used just for staff and not for passengers. My concern is Country Lane that leads up to it is single track. It's not a dual lane. Is that going to be cause traffic congestion along there?
So the southern parking lot is set up for staff and or participants of the Sunday service. So it would not be for the general congregation.
What concerns me is it will get congested, or there's a possibility of it being congested.
Well, I guess we felt that it was
there.
Right, but our feeling was that it was going to be for designated people, so it's not as if it was the regular congregation coming and going, checking to see if they can get a spot in the lot.
Well, going on to that, do you have an assurance that Country Drive is wide enough now to accommodate the traffic you're going to get, which you don't have now?
This is John Roberts. We will use that parking for staff only on Sunday morning. So they'll come in, we'll come in to park in that location early, and then filter out of that space after our responsibilities are finished. So we don't anticipate two-way traffic on that lane during Sundays, and on school days it will be closed. The parking will be closed, and it's used for our students for as a hard top recreation.
Okay. Okay.
Further questions from the commission?
Yeah, Dennis. I think that's an excellent point, Granville. I mean, it is a parking lot. people are coming in and out. It is a one-lane road that's going in there. Unfortunately, they're already increasing or decreasing the green space. And although I would like that to be a proper double road, actually, I'd like to see a master plan someday to get rid of the access to this property, which is now a significant piece of property, subject to greater development. I would like the access totally off of Hawthorne and directly off the main road. So has there been any thoughts to any other future planning of how this will grow over the years and whether we can get that in and out traffic off of a subdivision street and onto the main road?
I can respond to that. Over the last 20 years, we have looked at a number of plans that would call for an entrance and exit off of Ballas. There's a lot of sight distance problems with doing so, and that has been the primary reason we have never pursued that as an option.
Further questions from the commission?
Well, in continuation of that discussion, of course, I think we get into areas which more concern the church rather than the school. With the gross parking, where the spillage is necessary to go, will eventually go on to Hawthorne. For example, the biggest need for parking spaces is between services when you've got this one service turning out and one service coming in. During the service themselves, you don't necessarily need as many parking spots, but where does the excess? But I'm not sure this discussion today is relevant on parking. That's the church's big issue, not for this school only. So I'm happy to just consider the parking that's needed for the school.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. McKnight.
as I'm looking at this parking space, it looks like today, I'm just looking at the overhead of the school, and I walked it. This parking lot that's on the south side of the school already exists, correct? There's already a parking lot there. Are you planning on tearing that up, or you're keeping that parking lot as is and just changing the driveway to the south instead of coming from the existing off that service drive?
So the majority of the parking lot is there presently. In connecting to the southern drive, we will be adding a couple of stalls. But yes, the majority of the, actually, we're not adding any stalls. We're just adding the drive that connects that parking lot to the country lane, because the access to the north will be cut off with the building addition.
Mm-hmm.
Alderman Fauci?
So I did want to bring up an email we received this afternoon from Town and Country's Historical Preservation Society. And they mentioned, and I'm sure everyone else has read the same email, the opportunity to put some language in preserving several of the houses for the future. Can you talk a little bit to the houses in question? I know that in the email it said staff had discussed this with you and you were prepared to speak to it.
This is,
I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know who wants to speak to that.
yeah, so the two houses that were mentioned in the email were the Edwards house and the Summers house. Both were built prior to 1930, one even in the 1800s, and we're aware of the comment or the language that's been proposed to preserve them. And we haven't talked in depth with the city about that. I don't know, John Roberts, if you have had conversations about that.
No, I had an opportunity to just visit very briefly with the church's senior pastor about this this issue, and obviously we're open to having those conversations. We have no plans at this time for either of those houses beyond just Summers House is currently being used still by the family that owned it prior to the church purchasing it. And the Edwards House is used just for occasional, Bible studies and things like that. So we don't have any plans for those houses right now, but we have not had an opportunity to really discuss this proposal either.
This is Dennis. Well, the commission has been given some language by staff, which is persuasive, and that there is some interest. This may be one of the oldest, at least one of them, the 1865 or 1863, may be one of the oldest present houses in Town and Country. So I think we have some interest certainly in preserving it, and it looks like a pretty nice house from the outside, at least from Ballas Road. We had perhaps an older house that is now a park, or part of a park, that was a log cabin, and the Bauer family built a house around it, and we have that has been preserved. So that may be older, at least the log cabin part was probably older. So anyway, we don't have a lot of this in Town and Country, but to the extent that we do have it, I think there is a group of folks in the city who has an interest in preserving it. And to the extent that we can make a condition to this approval. So our question is, you have read the conditions. Are you prepared to say that you're in agreement with those conditions for this plan approval?
John, I would defer to you to answer that.
Well, again, I spoke with, I actually texted with Ryan Laughlin this afternoon, our senior pastor, about this requirement. And again, we have no plans to do anything with the buildings right now, the houses right now. But if it is a requirement to move forward on this project, we are willing to agree to those terms.
Okay, well, thank you. I mean, we're just, and staff went over this, and the people in the Historical Foundation gave this some thought. And we're not saying you can't ever do anything to it. It's just that we would certainly like you to at least go through some process of review, just like tonight, and maybe get some positive feedback on what is the good for everyone, in order to reasonably continue the usage of those properties. And I think the second provision was that if for some reason it has to be torn down or it's in the way of some really master plan that you think you cannot live without, that at least you give the city an opportunity, a breathing period for finding some folks that seem to be interested, maybe move it, who knows what. We moved 2 or 3 log cabins in the city. I know this house would be a little bit more daunting than moving a log cabin, but to the extent that people want to preserve it, at least give them a breathing period to step forward. And if they don't step forward, then presumably there's not enough interest. So if you're not in opposition to those, we would certainly like to make those a condition to this approval.
We are not, we're not in opposition to it.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Since we're talking about public comments, Ms. Lowell, have we received any other public comments?
We have received 2 public comments. One was from Tom Santel, trustee Hawthorne, and the other one was the aforementioned from Skip Manch. So those will be attached to the minutes of this meeting.
Thank you. For the record, I believe the trustees were in favor of the project. Is that correct?
With
Yes.
the driveway, with the new driveway.
Yeah.
All right, further questions or comments, discussion from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, a process question for the staff on this. These houses, I guess I'm looking at the revised final plan here, and it doesn't include removing the houses.
No,
Would removing the houses require an additional permit, additional action from the city? And would it be necessary to have this language in this agreement, or would the city also have an ability to look at this again before someone were to tear a house down?
They would need to amend the site plan. They would have tearing the homes down. That's a change to the amended site plan.
Alderman,
And I think,
and then Mr. Kuchin.
I just wanted to add that the language put forward by staff and our attorney brought up bringing an architectural review prior to demolition of these buildings. Generally speaking, architectural review wouldn't get involved until a new home is being constructed or a front, elevation is being changed. So this would bring the architectural review folks in earlier if this condition is added. And that would give them an opportunity to have that conversation.
Kuchin?
I was going to suggest.
Go ahead, Andy.
I was going to suggest that we hold off on a substantive discussion until we actually have language in front of us proposed by the commission.
I think we do
Seems
have.
to me we're speculating right now what.
It was in the email. There's some language. In
Yeah, we have that
I mean,
language.
no, but that was proposed by the Historical Society. That wasn't proposed by this commission. Maybe that's.
It was proposed by staff and the city attorney.
Would
If you
care
go
for me to
down,
read them?
there are multiple
Yeah.
attachments.
No, I understand. I read all of it. That's.
Right.
My thought was, at some point, as we get into substantive discussions here around the conditions, somebody on this commission will propose actual language. And it seems to me that's the time to discuss. Because I don't know what I'm discussing right now and not having official language in front of me.
I see. Yes, thank you.
Fair?
All right, so we'll when the time comes, someone's going to add that and we'll discuss it then. Further questions or discussion? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and if there's no other public comments that have come in since I last asked you, Ms. Lowell, I'm going to declare the public hearing closed.
There has not.
Do I have a motion on, I guess the first item would be on agenda item number 1. Is there a motion to recommend approval of the boundary adjustment plat?
So moved.
A motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Kuchin. Further discussion on the motion?
Yeah, my question of staff then and our attorney, should these conditions that we're talking about voting on, should they be part of number 1 or number 2?
I would suggest agenda item number 2, the amended final site development plan.
All right. Then we have the motion on the floor. It's been seconded. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Well, I would like, and do we have staff conditions for number 1?
There's one condition.
What is it?
A, all required variances, and there are 5 variances that at this time will be required. All required variances shall be approved prior to the recording of the boundary adjustment plat with St. Louis County.
Okay, I am making a suggestion for a condition number 2 to the plat. And that,
Well, we're on the boundary adjustment. We're on
sorry,
agenda item 1 right now.
I'm sorry, the plat, I mean the boundary adjustment. So I'm still concerned about these easements. So I'm open to suggestions on what staff and our attorney believes that if we have a condition about vacating easement before we allow people to build improvements on them, should it be in number 1 or number 2? And I'm open to putting them wherever you think is best.
I agree with Laura. I think we can go better with the agenda item 2 flat as opposed to the boundary adjustment.
Okay, all right. Then other than staff's condition number 1, I don't have any further suggestions for condition for item number 1.
Mr. Bolzina, any further discussion on agenda item number 1?
Quick point of order, Mr. Chairman, when the proposal was made, was it made with the condition number 1? Because I did not hear that entered. So if it is not, I'd move that we would add that to it.
When you say condition number 1, you mean the variances?
The condition that we had on the proposal number 1, when I heard it announced, I did not hear condition A listed as part of the agenda or as part of the motion.
Yes.
Alderman Fauci, would you like to add that to your motion?
Yes, please.
And Mr. Kuchin, do you agree with that?
I will second.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mr. McKnight's a stickler, I tell you. All right, Ms. Lowell, you call the roll.
Mr. McKnight,
Yes.
Dr. O'Mell,
Aye.
Mr. Kuchin,
Yes.
Mr. White,
Aye.
Alderman Fauci,
Aye.
Mr. Bolazina,
Yes.
Miss Munzel,
Aye.
Miss Miller,
Yes.
Mayor Dalton,
Vote aye.
and Chairman Sema.
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously.
Okay, do I have a motion on agenda item number 2, the amended final site development plan?
I'll make a motion to approve the site development plan with conditions A through H.
A motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. McKnight. Further discussion?
I will make a motion to amend the, do we have, it's approved on the floor, right?
Yes, on the floor, please.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to amend item number E, conditions. It presently says no permit shall be granted for construction of development of the site until a boundary adjustment plat is approved and recorded with the recorder of deeds. I would add, and all existing easements that interfere with the proposed construction are vacated.
Seconded.
All right, seconded by Mr. White. Discussion on the amendment.
Chairman, can I inquire of the applicant?
Please, Mayor Dalton.
Clearly, this is everyone's intent. Does that present any timing challenges from your perspective? And if it does, how can we get to the same conclusion that Commissioner Bolazina states, which is something that everyone supports, without presenting those timing challenges?
Well, as I mentioned, we've already begun the preparation of the easement vacation exhibits. So we will just fast track those and get them off to the utility companies as soon as possible. Again, I don't see any harm in it. The only easement that has a utility in it that's impacted is for Ameren, and we've already begun discussions, and they're designing a reroute. So Again, I don't see the need for it, but we will move forward expeditiously.
Okay. Well, I could add to that, subject to any delays that may be occasioned by utility companies, but not by the applicant. In other words, you've done your work and you're only waiting for somebody on the other end to do what they have to do.
Mr. Chairman.
Hold on just a second. So we have Mr. Bolzina has altered his amendment. Mr. White, do you second?
I second.
Okay. Yes, Mr. McKnight, please.
I guess one of the questions that we could look at here as well is there will be an occupancy permit required for this, or an occupancy permit, I guess, required or allowed for this to allow them to actually start doing school there.
That's
Would there
correct.
be a possibility to limit this to say the occupancy permit would be held up until such time, which would allow them to start construction, but certainly give them a motivation to get these things vacated? And I guess that's a question for Mr. Bolzina. Would that satisfy the things that what you're looking for?
It would not satisfy me because I still continue to believe it's a poor planning practice to allow construction over somebody else's.
I agree.
land.
Mayor Dalton?
I think Commissioner Bolzina's point is well placed. The objective here is to place the onus on the applicant to do everything they can to satisfy these good planning practices. If they've done that, then they should be allowed to proceed. And that the only proviso would be that if the holdup is still associated with the utility or the easement holder's interests, that is no fault of the applicant, and they should be allowed to proceed. And that's my understanding of Commissioner Bolzina's motion, and that's something I would wholly support.
Thank you. Further discussion on the amendment. Mr. Kuchin.
I'm looking for a restatement of that amended or adjusted wording.
That our clerk is as well.
Well, I can try.
Okay.
Give it a whack.
So condition E would say no permit shall be granted for construction or development of the site until a boundary adjustment of plat is approved and recorded with the recorder of deeds, and all existing easements that interfere with the building are vacated, subject to any delays by the utility and not by the applicant. Was that correct, Mr. Bolzina?
That's pretty good. I would say, I think instead of the building, I would say construction of the proposed improvements.
It was proposed construction.
Proposed construction.
Proposed construction. Okay.
Okay.
Any other discussion on the amendment?
One point on that, starting construction before we get the easements. Supposing construction starts and the easements are not vacated, that's a big risk for the applicant, which he might be willing to take. But does that offer any liability to the city for us giving, as it were, tacit agreement to go ahead with construction?
Well,
no, I don't think there's any liability for the city there. If one property owner violates the property rights of another property owner, that's a private matter. We've not said go ahead and do that. We've said that your proposed plan complies with our code requirements. So if there is an issue that comes up that say Ameren or some other easement holder says, hey, you can't put that building there because of my rights, that would be a private matter between the two parties.
and it does say no permits, so presumably construction cannot start without a permit.
Okay, any other discussion? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Motion appears to carry unanimously. We have
I will
a
propose.
motion.
Okay, me or someone else?
Mr. Bolzini?
Okay, I propose to add the 2 conditions as prepared by staff that pertain to the historical significance of 2 of the buildings on this site. Staff has written them, they can read them into the record, and I endorse them.
Ms. Lowell?
So condition I would read, oh, I lost it. Hold on one second. The modification or alteration of the exterior of the accessory buildings known as the Summers House and Edwards House shall require review and approval by both the Architecture Review Board and Board of Aldermen prior to the issuance of any building permits. I'd like to take the motion or the conditions one at a time.
Yeah, well, I'll take that one. And my only question would be whether we want to interject planning and zoning in that triumvirate, or whether we would see it anyway. Presumably, if they are doing something to the building that is an allowable use, planning and zoning would not see that. But maybe we do want to see it.
If the buildings were expanded in any way, they would need variances, and they would need to amend the final site development plan. So you guys would see it. Right. If they're just doing aesthetic alterations that impact the facade, you guys wouldn't see it. But in this case, they would go to Architecture Review Board for review and recommendation, and Board of Aldermen for approval, similar to a commercial project.
Okay, I'm satisfied with that.
Mr. Chairman, question to staff.
Go ahead, Mr. McKnight.
Would this require them then to go to the Board of Aldermen to re-roof this house?
Oh, yes, well, if they're changing it, if they're changing the style of the roof.
Alteration of the exterior. Okay, so a re-roofing with the similar materials would not be considered an alteration? Okay.
I do not consider an alteration.
I'd hate to overburden them with that idea that I want to replace a roof.
No. That was not staff's intent.
But if they go from gray to blue, it might be something.
Yeah. That's not defined. That's not defined as well as I'd like. Oh, yes, I'll second that motion.
And so, Mr. Bolzini, so I'm clear, you've got a motion that's been seconded by Mr. McKnight, and we're taking these one at a time. So this is for the first bullet, the modification or alteration. That one.
This would be I, condition I.
All right. Any discussion on condition I, the proposed condition I by Mr. Bolzini?
I'm still struggling a little, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I'm still struggling a little bit with how are we defining modification or alteration? Is that a staff decision? Is that how do we give instructions to staff to say that something is a modification or alteration that would kick off a architectural review and building permit? I don't want to have repairs on the side of a building to be something to be considered an alteration. So again, I'm just coming back to how do we define that in a way that the staff doesn't end up having, basically having to make these decisions without direction.
I don't know. The staff wrote it.
I know.
Mr. Spencer, maybe you've got a comment there.
Again, I wrote it. Yes, I interpret it as modification or alteration is a change, is something that is substantially different than what's existing. I don't believe painting a house or replacing the shingles is a modification or alteration that's substantial. I believe physically taking out columns, windows, things of that nature. If you want to get more detailed, provide better direction, to future staff and so forth, then by all means, I think that's great. But that was my intent with modification and alteration was simple repairs and maintenance without triggering review.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Please.
So yeah, so the city has a property maintenance code as well, and so I imagine I think the language the kind of work that would be required under that code to maintain, I assume staff wouldn't interpret as being a modification or an alteration, repainting something the same color, to make sure it's protected from the elements if it's kind of trim around the window, versus something that's replacing an element of or changing. So I think that's I think typically how staff would interpret it, by looking at the property maintenance code to determine whether it's something that's to preserve it in its current condition versus something that would change it.
I could suggest a second sentence in order to give comfort to the owners and some of our other commissioners, and that would be: repairs with materials that are similar or equal to existing materials shall not be considered a modification.
Mr. McKnight?
I would certainly second that.
Okay, well, that's an amendment to my amendment. I will put that forward for a second.
We just got that second from.
I seconded that. Yep.
Okay, all right.
Further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion appears to carry unanimously. Mr. Bolzina.
But now we're at the original motion, right? So that was a motion to correct the motion, or is that, did he?
No, that was,
modify the original?
we just amended it with aye.
Okay.
Okay, J, condition J would be as staff has proposed in its second bullet point. Can be read into the record.
So condition J would be the approval of any demolition permit submitted for the accessory buildings known as the Summers House and Edwards House shall be withheld for a period of 170 days in order to 270 days, I apologize. In order for review by the city of potential means of preservation in lieu of demolition, unless due to the dangerous condition of the structure, the city finds that the public health, safety, and welfare requires the demolition within a shorter period of time.
All right, I've got a motion by Mr. Bellazina. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Alderman Fauci.
Aye.
Good.
All right, do I have discussion on, that was J, but on condition number J?
Chairman,
Mayor Dalton.
can I ask for a comment by the applicant or its team regarding this matter? It doesn't seem to be that substantive. It just affords the city an opportunity to consider the matter. I don't know what rights it would or wouldn't have. I appreciated Mr. Spencer's comment in response to the president of the Historical Society's expression of interest. But if the applicant would comment on the matter, I would be comforted by their assurance that this does not trouble them in any respect.
Are you speaking generally about the requirements for us to make changes to the building?
No, I'm speaking to the requirements of this particular timing requirement or condition that affords additional time to the city to then look at preservation opportunities. Everybody appreciates historic preservation, but what I don't want to do is impose a notice requirement and an opportunity for people to sit back and comment and think and offer their thoughts about other people's property while they are somehow slowed or impeded in their project. If you're okay with the requirement, then I'm fine with it. I think it's well intentioned, but I sometimes things that are well intentioned from a historical preservation perspective can cause impediments to people that are otherwise trying to advance their property interests and those of the people that of their constituents, and nothing productive comes of it.
I would simply say, I mean, we've been having conversations about preserving these buildings already, so we don't have any particular concerns with the requirements that are being asked of us.
That gives me great comfort then. If you're okay with it, I'm okay with it. I just want to make sure you understand the impact, and as I said, the objective is a good one, but as long as it doesn't, you don't anticipate a problem should those requirements come into being, then I'm comforted by that.
No, we have to plan well in advance for everything that we do. So the timing does not impede our opportunities.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. And as I mean, the people that want to preserve things are certainly well-intentioned, but sometimes they just can't come up with the money to give you a reasonable alternative. We've had this experience recently with the Frank Lloyd Wright House in our city, where we tried to find $1 million and we couldn't do it. So, so it's from that objective, just give the city some notice of where you're going, give some folks an opportunity to rally the troops if they can. If they can't, you know, you go do what you are legally allowed to do. So, but it's a good thought. And
Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
in keeping with the comment from the mayor, and I think this is also in keeping with this, the meaning of this, I think we could potentially make a change to have this be withheld for a period of up to 270 days. So that if there were no concern or if there were no issue, it wouldn't be a mandatory 270-day limit. The city could reduce it and make it 180 days. It could make it 30 days. It could make it less. So I'll make a motion to modify this condition that it should read, the house shall be withheld, the Edwards House shall be withheld for a period of up to 270 days in order for review by the city.
Well said.
Discussion. I mean, I think I'm opposed to that. I mean, obviously, if the city is convinced that, what's going to happen is that some third-party group is going to try to raise some money to do something. And it's not really within the control of the city to give them a different deadline. Now, if a group steps forward, call it group number one, and they're all hot, but they lose interest, and then group number two comes in. Well, we never know. I mean, we need to give them a definite time period that says, okay, you got 270 days. If you can't offer these folks a reasonable plan, it's over. And I don't know how the city could ever get to a point and say, well, this group doesn't seem to be interested. We're not going to enforce the 270 days. It's just not a possible situation.
Chairman.
Yeah, Mayor Dalton.
I completely disagree with that perspective. I support Commissioner McKnight's point. This leaves the authority with the city. That's where it belongs. If there is a reasonable case being advanced for the preservation efforts, then the city will use that authority to extend that period for the full length of the time. If there is not, in its discretion, then that period of time could be shortened to allow for the applicant to proceed. I think it leaves the discretion right where it belongs, and that's with this city.
And I still don't think I have a second on that, so.
No, yeah, I'm just the point of order. So I have a motion that we have not, for an amendment we have not voted on. And then I have a proposed amendment that the original amendee does not appear to support. I'm not sure how I should move forward on this. Maybe.
Well, we need a second for the amended condition J.
All right, so do I have a second on Mr. McKnight's amendment?
I was Mr. McKnight's proposal.
Seconded by Mr. White. Discussion on Mr. McKnight's amendment, up to 270 days.
Well, I continue.
My question is, where does the 270 days come from?
Yeah.
How did we arrive at 270 days?
270 days is what the city of Kirkwood uses. They have a very robust landmarks historic preservation process. They automatically institute 270-day stay of demolition on historic properties.
Oh, interesting. Very good.
To do exactly what Dennis is talking about, which is trying to find an alternative in lieu of demolition. So I thought that was a good amount of time.
Mr. Bolzina?
Sounds good to me. And I would just reiterate that I think the city leaves itself open if it closes the door before a group that may be unknown would step forward and want to do something. I just don't think that's should be within the discretion of the city or place the city in that position that says, well, nobody's called me about it, so why don't we just change it to 170? Well, we don't know who's out there working, toiling, trying to make some contacts, trying to collect money that come in within the deadline. I just don't think it's workable to have that flexibility. I think you need a deadline, and if you don't satisfy the deadline, it's over.
And the 270 starts with the submission of the demolition application. So when Laura Lowell has it in her hands and it's dated, that starts the clock. That 270.
Thanks, Mr. Spencer. Further discussion on the amendment, to the amendment. Ms. Lowell, will you call the roll?
Mr. Kuchin?
Just so I'm clear, what I'm voting on is the amendment to J proposed by Mr. McKnight.
Correct.
You're proposing to, he's proposed to change the language to up to 270.
Yep, I will vote yes.
Ms. Munzel?
No.
Dr. O'Mell?
Nay.
That was nay.
Nay.
Thank you. Alderman Fauci?
Nay.
Mr. White?
Nay.
Chairman Sema?
Nay.
Mr. McKnight?
Yes.
Ms. Miller?
I'm a no.
Mr. Bolazina?
No.
And Mayor Dalton?
Vote aye.
The motion fails 7-3.
Okay, so J stays as for a period of 270 days. We do any further discussion on J? All in favor of adding J as a condition, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion appears to carry unanimously. Okay, we have an amended motion. Now conditions through J. Any further discussion? All right, Ms. Lowell, will you call the roll?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead,
one
Mr.
question.
Chairman.
This is a question for staff. Section or condition H, previous conditions, all other requirements imposed as conditions will remain in effect unless specifically amended by approval of this amended final site development plan. Does that need to go at the end, or can that stay H and have an I and a J after it?
I don't have an answer on that. I don't see the to shift it. It's quite common to be the last condition, boilerplate statement. We've never shifted it before, as far as I'm aware.
From a legal perspective, I don't think it, as Ryan says, normally it would be the last one because it's a catch-all, but it doesn't change the meaning by not being the last one.
Okay, that's all I need to know.
Ms. Lowell, will you call the roll?
Alderman Fauci,
Aye.
Ms. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. White,
Aye.
Mr. McKnight,
Yes.
Chairman Sema,
Yes.
Mayor Dalton, Mr. Kuchen,
Yes.
Ms. Munzel,
Aye.
Dr. O'Mell,
Aye.
and Mr. Bolazina.
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously.
Okay.
Good luck, folks.
Yeah, good
Yeah.
luck. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're of course welcome to stay, or you're welcome to drop off. It's up to you. Other business, says staff updates, Mr. Spencer?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just want to touch base on a couple things. Sign code subcommittee, which you're a member of, we've met twice now. Since restarting last month, we meet again next Wednesday. Making progress moving forward. We're getting very close to finalizing draft. So hopefully sometime late summer, early fall, that will be before this body, and we can have that discussion. And, unfortunately, the comprehensive plan, holidays, COVID-19, and all these things kind of got in the way, but we've started that up, and hopefully we'll bring this home after 8-9 years that we've been trying to complete it. So, and
we're hoping that there's no additional court cases that tell us we can not make any more restrictions to any signs in our city. So
Belmar's not allowed to issue sign permits. Yeah, the only other thing was we did have those natural resource amendments last fall, and I just want to give you an update. We've been enforcing the tree preservation plans for new houses. So far, we've enforced on 15 new houses. They've had to provide tree preservation plans, and I think the process is going really well. Everyone's complying, and there hasn't been what I would consider any real hiccups as of yet. Only one house had to actually plant more trees. They've all been complying with 50% minimum, some by quite a bit. So I think it's working. They're being more mindful of construction, and staff will continue to monitor that. And if we need to revisit at some point in the future, we'll report back. But as of right now, it's going quite well, I think, from an infill housing perspective. And that's all I had.
Great, thank you. Alderman Fauci, do you have a report from the Board of Aldermen?
I sure do. We have a couple of things that the board passed on Monday night. The first was the pavilion pergola at 12027 Galecrest Lane. And we also passed the 2019 South Mason Road swimming pool, which planning and zoning saw both of those. We first read the 929 Claymark Drive multi-purpose structure, and that one did have quite a bit of comment during the public hearing. So I anticipate a lively discussion on that in 2 weeks when it's time for the vote. Other city news, we will be losing, unfortunately, our public works director. I'm very sad to say, at the end of this month. And so we will be looking for someone to replace Tim Gregowitz. I know the city is all very sad about that. And also on Monday night, new commission chairs were appointed, and I will be staying on the Planning and Zoning Commission as your liaison to the board for another year.
All right.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Or our condolences, one of the, however you want to.
Exactly.
I really like it, so, you know, it's working out well for me.
Mr. Chairman, move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
This activity that former Mayor Mange suggested through this historical preservation, he was also inquiring whether planning and zoning would want to be involved with a committee, special committee, like we've had on many occasions, to maybe discuss or propose specific ordinances that would further demonstrate some interest in protection of historical and significant structures in the city. As Mr. Spencer has said, Kirkwood, of course, which is a very much older community, has very specific laws protecting their historical structures. So we're not as blessed with older structures, but I was surprised to learn that we've got this building that's well over 100 years old on Ballas Road. The two of them, matter of fact. So I don't know how many there are out there. Obviously, there needs to be an inventory. I know there was a history of Town and Country that was written that did identify some of those. So to the extent that this commission would have any interest in appointing a subgroup to look at this issue, I would suggest that we're not in our, I don't know if it's an appropriate time to do it, but I would like to at least put it on an agenda for a future meeting to discuss that.
Would I take you'd like to be involved in that, Mr. Belluzino?
Oh, I would, and I think Skip Mans would like to be involved, maybe as a liaison, not a commissioner of some sort, however that can happen. And whoever else has interest in old things besides ourselves.
Chairman Sema?
Yes.
So, Dennis, I did want to let you know that there is a gentleman working on a history book of the older structures along South Mason Road, a number of which date in the 1800s, actually.
Great.
And I'd be happy to put you in touch with him if that is helpful.
Great, great. So, you know, so we have a few. Maybe we should be concerned about it. Maybe we're an up and coming modern community and we don't care about it, but I think at least the topic should be discussed, because I do like to see our heritage preserved in some fashion whenever we can.
Why don't we, Spencer, why don't we pick that up when we finally bring the sign code over the finish line? We'll have that.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Sorry.
All right. We have a motion to adjourn by Dr. O'Mell and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed. We will see you next month.